Over the years, there have been a lot of SCP games and mods to be released. Some of these SCP games have gone extremely popular or have gone very underground either due to time or due to a dead player base. However, the industry in the SCP universe continues to live on, in media such as YouTube videos like The Rubber, short-styled movies based off of it like SCP Overlord, and video games like SCP Containment Breach. I think I can speak for everyone when I say, in a sense, the SCP universe is extremely scary. There are a myriad of factors, like the sense of being isolated in a containment breach, the thought of 096 or 682 or even 3000 existing, or the fact that we aren't allowed to hug SCP-999. But my question isn't about media, like short films or YouTube videos, or even the thousands of SCP articles. My question is, what is the scariest SCP game that can be out there? Now, I'm gonna do my best to try to find the scariest SCP games that I can list. For the sake of my own sanity, I'm going to only list 3. What are the 3 scariest SCP games that we or I can find? I'm going to rank my list on these factors here to determine what is the top 3 scariest SCP games we can find out there. Now you may be asking, what are these factors? I will determine the top 3 games on my list from firstly, the sound design, not specifically in music or in the soundtrack, but how scary and atmospheric it makes the world around the player. Secondly, how atmospheric the game is. Does the game do a well enough job with encapsulating the terrifying horror of the world? And, to that question, how well does it instill fear into the player? Thirdly, kind of an irrelevant one, how polished is the game? If the game, let's say, was made in a matter of weeks and the game looks terrible, it's not gonna go on the list. The graphics don't need to be top-notch, but at least needs to be good enough to be atmospheric. And lastly, how horrific is this game overall? Does it make every player who plays it shit themselves, or is it just like a meh? Now after all of that explaining, let's get down to what is personally the third on the list of the scariest SCP games. SCP-087 is a game based around the Infinite Staircase where it includes you as the player to venture down as previously said in Infinite Staircase. There is no long, drawn-out intro, no unnecessary dialogue drops, just it drops you into the game immediately with the loudest metal door slam to ever face the planet. With the inclusion of the darkness, somewhat decent graphics, and the loud door slam, it immediately tells the player that you aren't going to like what is coming, whilst also setting the tone for what is about to happen. As you descend down the staircase, it begins to get more and more dark to a point where the mind begins to play tricks on you. The only audio you hear is what sounds to be the player breathing, the player stepping on the concrete steps as you continue to descend down into absolutely nothing. Eventually, the more you descend, the more this strange ambience, which sounds to be a distorted wind, gets louder. You also begin to hear screams, people crying, and after a while what sounds to be machinery moving. This game is absolutely nothing but isolation and overall madness until you finally begin to see shadows come towards you, and after a while, you see a face in the darkness, and if you go closer, it proceeds to kill you and the game boots you out of it. This game is absolutely horrifying with the sound effects, horrifying with its overall atmosphere, and just how much it instills fear into the player. In the stream I did, I was doing nothing but shitting my pants because of how horrific this game truly is. It never gets too jumpy with its jump scares, and instead the only shadows only expose themselves when you least expect it. With that being said, however, let us go on to the next game on my list. Now, I know there are a lot of people who would argue about this being on the list, but SCP Unity is actually extremely good. Yes, I know the list is about what SCP games are the scariest, but I'm also allowing myself to review the 3 games that encapsulate the horrors of the SCP universe the best, and SCP Unity does it in spades. It's just great. SCP Unity does a very good job at showcasing the world, the atmosphere, the tone, the SCPs, and the gameplay to us. The chase scenes with SCP-106 are pretty intense, I have to say, and knowing that SCP-173 could be right behind a door with a loud audio stinger makes this game just an absolute hit for me. Speaking about the game graphically, this game looks absolutely visually stunning. SCP Unity gives me very reminiscent Black Mesa vibes due to how realistic the site looks after being in a containment breach. There is an extreme level of polish that actually convinces me that this is a facility where demonic horrors lie and continue to thrive as they proceed to murder everyone in the facility. So, again, it perfectly encapsulates that SCP universe kind of feeling, where I do genuinely feel like a D-class personnel trying to escape this place with my life. Because obviously it is a facility, you remain in complete isolation with the only encounters with any other living creature is with the SCPs themselves. And on that note, there was always that suspense of opening a door and expecting SCP-173 to be behind it, but in reality he isn't. That is what I love about this game the most, just the overall suspense and atmosphere. Sound effects wise, the distant blaring alarms alongside the soothing and somewhat nostalgic music makes this game even more immersive than it already is. The cute noises SCP-131 makes are great, and not to mention the intense-ass chase music the game plays when SCP-106 is on you, alongside the heartbeat it plays when you spot 173, makes this game an even more of a hit. It would be a serious criminal offense to not put this game on my list, as it does everything amazingly and does well to instill fear brain into my ape brain. Now, after saying all of that, we will now move on to what I think in the years and years of SCP game releases is the scariest SCP game that you can play. Honestly, I feel like we all saw this one coming, as SCP Containment Breach is seriously horrifying. I also feel like it is a great way to applaud the one single developer who made this game, because SCP Containment Breach is a truly terrifying game. From the moment shit hits the fan and SCP-173 kills the two other D-Class alongside the guard, it makes itself abundantly clear that you are seriously not going to have a good time. Furthermore, it continues with this line of horror in the next room where you come face to face with SCP-173, and if you get too close to 173, it proceeds to kill you. The game's tone is essentially like this throughout the entire game, where you go face to face with nothing but SCPs and MTF. SCP-173 chases don't really happen often, but he does show himself constantly throughout the entire game, alongside SCP-049, SCP-106, SCP-966, and SCP-096. SCP-939 exists, but you don't really need to go see 939 in order to beat the game, so he's kind of an irrelevant SCP. You are in constant paranoia, and the game tries to make you feel as isolated as humanly possible, with the only encounters being MTF who shoot you on sight, SCPs that also kill you on sight, 079 speaking to you, and you seeing D-Class and scientists die right in front of you. The constant paranoia is also charged due to the fact that the horrific ambient soundtrack and the non-stop plethora of noises that happens across the entire game. You are absolutely never ever given a break, and you need to be on high alert and have continual awareness about what is around you. Sound design is absolutely terrifying, with you hearing nothing but SCP-682 screams, people like D-Class and scientists screaming all over the facility, and strange technological noises like loud beepings and alarms blaring. The sound effects in this game never give up and stay that way the entire game. I know I might sound like a broken record, but I am not kidding when I say for the 100,000th time that the sounds throughout the game is frightening. I will say, however, on a different note, if you want a better deep dive analysis on most of the gameplay and some cool development things about the game, go check out my SCP Containment Breach 10 years later video. I spent a lot of time into it and the video is extremely detailed. Overall though, for Containment Breach, the game is insanely scary and strives to give the player a memorable experience, by making them quite literally shit themselves. People who have beaten this game on Keter, I have absolutely no idea on how they did, but I applaud them and congratulate them for literally diving into the shit. Like literally, how the fuck do you manage to... How the fuck do you manage to play this shit, man? And that is all for today. This was my personal, or if you want it to be, official list of the scariest SCP games that I can find. Or, you know, just the top 3 scariest SCP games. And the general question of the video was answered. What is the scariest SCP game? That honorable title goes to SCP Containment Breach. Very much deserved, I have to say. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. I plan on making more videos exactly like this. I still have a video I'm making that is 8 pages long with 4,000 fucking words. So it is going to be a very long video. With nothing more to add, thanks for watching and have a great day.